Hello, and welcome to the Angry Ewok channel. Today, we will be discussing the Vassel World Cup Top 4. We'll be looking at their lists, we'll be looking at some stills of their games, and discussing how they fly these fleets, what they have put into these fleets that makes them so good, and allows them to get to this very prestigious place in the Armada world. The first fleet we'll be looking at is Brobafett's fleet, and he's running an Onager test bed, a Squall Quasar, a Raider, and an Imperial squad ball. He's using Admiral Sloan here to try to increase the efficiency of those squadrons, and he's got, from the top, he's got an Onager. It's a fairly typical Onager. He's got veteran gunners, ordnance experts to give him a lot more reliability. He's got Cataclysm so he can threaten a first turn shot if he needs to. He's got the long range ignition shot, which is pretty much always taken. And then he's got engine techs. That's kind of an interesting pick. But what we can infer from this is that he plans on using that engine tech at some point. This Onager is particularly well suited to taking one, maybe two good ignition shots, and then stepping on the gas and leaving. He can go from an essentially speed 2 to speed 4 in a turn with a single nav dial. If he has a dial token, he can essentially go from 1 to 4 because he can, be going speed 1, spin a dial, spin a token, go up to speed 3, spin the engine techs and go speed 4, making this a very hard Onager to pin down. So that's probably a good thing that you can think about when you're looking at this fleet and how it's going to function. Then you've got your Squall Quasar. Squall basically gives 3 squadrons within blue range of Squall a range 2 move before they activate. This is going to increase his overall alpha strike range. He has enough speed 5 squadrons that he can easily send 3 of these, so you can potentially be hit at distance 5 plus a distance 2 plus a distance 1 shot. So that's, if you actually line that up on your board edge, he can hit you inside your deployment zone on turn 1. This is not new or different. This is the same 2-ship kind of stuff that we've been seeing, but it's got expanded, it's got Grint, it's got flight controllers and boosted, so it can push from long range. It can push 6 every single turn. It'll push 6 every single turn with flight controllers. So that's what it does. It has absolutely no intention of fighting in any way, shape, or form. It's going to run and push squadrons. And then we've got a Raider. This is a Sloan lifeboat. It's got a Hondo Anaka card that basically just fuels Cataclysm. This again, a ship that has absolutely no intention or desire to fight in any way, shape, or form, has every intention to run away from you. And then we've got the aces, and so the ace package is going to be Jindin and Steel. It's shocking no one. They will be taken from now until the end of time because of how unbelievably good they are. I would submit to you that they are too good, but that's my opinion. I think my opinion is supported by most of the community, but we still take him en masse. And then Tel Trevura, who's fast becoming that 3rd slot ace that's taken a lot in Imperial Air Wings because of his ability to shrug off damage, his ability to come back from the dead. A truly amazing durability. And then, interestingly, Broba goes for Suntir Fel here instead of Mauler. Mauler is typically, you typically see Steel, Jindin, Mauler, Tel. But Suntir, I think, here is more meant to cash in on the fact that he's got both Black Squadron and Tel Trevura with Escort to direct that aggro, and then Suntir is there to try to get some free damage on with that. And Suntir is a little more offensive than Mauler in terms of 4 blue dice and a little faster range, counter 2. Then you got Saber Squadron, which again I think is the 5th Imperial ace in most everything you'll see, because Saber Squadron is basically the direct counter to anything you don't want to shoot at. For all those people that say Shara is real busted, Saber very commonly shoots her for 5 dice and for 4 dice after with Jindin, and there's no more Sharas. And then he's got 2 defenders and Black Squadron. So 2 defenders, very beefy. They always have every dice that they roll will get them some kind of effective result from Sloan, so they're very reliable. That comboed with steel is really the reliable damage that this fleet will put out. It'll be put out 2 shots from steel, 2 shots from these defenders that will do something, and then the rest of it's just kind of incidental stuff, trying to, strip tokens and get hits where they can. But that's, if I'm looking at this fleet strikes me as this Onager's going to try to deliver 1 to 2 big shots and then try to just maul me with squadrons. And that's, I've played this fleet at LVO. That's basically what happened. There was no real shooting between our fleets, and then he killed my squadrons. And that's typically, I think, the game plan, and I think we'll see that when we see Louis' game with Broba, the way it turned out. That's what I would expect. Going into a fleet like this, when you look at it, that's what you should expect. So as an example of Broba's deployment, this is a picture from his game against Louis Andre. You can see the Onager is central. I think he probably would flop back and forth between putting it in the middle or putting it off to the side and having it turn in, but the Onager is going to anchor one side or the other. He's got the Raider in the middle, and I suspect this is a placement that is heavily influenced by the fact that Andre also has squadrons, and so that Raider is a good flak source. Andre does not have a whole lot of other damage sources outside of his squadrons and his Star Destroyer, so he's not worried about the Raider getting killed by incidental fire, because the Onager is going to place itself in the way of the Star Destroyer if the Raider comes under threat. And then the Quasar is literally turned back towards its own board edge, saying to all the world that I'm going to run and I'm going to squad push, and I am just a ship that does nothing but support squads. So that's a typical deployment, and then we'll advance to a portion of the game. We're not going to go all the way through this game yet. And here you can see, I think this was round 4, but the game in a nutshell turned out being, Louis was able to slip the arc of the Onager on the approach, so the Onager didn't have a good shot there, and decided, well, if I don't have a good shot here, I don't want to tangle with a Star Destroyer at close range, and immediately peeled out at speed 4. And you see where it is. It's turned back, going back towards this board edge, and the Raider, seeing this, also turned out, and then Louis was able to wait those 2 activations out and place this Star Destroyer here. Because basically the takeaway from this is a cut game. This is a win in advance to the Vassel World Cup finals, and Broba had an advantage because he was second player, and he had a 1 token advantage over Louis at this point. So he's probably much more apt to turn and run than he would normally be, because he's not trying to get a big victory, he's just trying to get a victory. And so he's setting up a chasing scenario where Louis has to chase, because unbothered, Broba will win a 6-5 and advance. And chasing is very bad in Armada. It's very difficult, but Louis ends up winning this game, and the way he ends up winning it is that he does mostly this: a masterful job of putting the Star Destroyer in a position where the Onager didn't get its big ignition shot on the closing turn, and then he was able to wait out and fork the Raider and the Onager, and in 1 activation kill the Onager after the Raider went. Like, the Raider would go, and we'll get there, but you get the idea. Louis was able to chase and make him pay for that, but the typical plan is to take a couple shots with the Onager, pull away, let your squadrons go win. And so the way this fleet, and something I always like to think about when I'm looking at a fleet and breaking down a fleet, is how does this thing beat me? How does it want the game to go? And so the way this fleet wants the game to go is for the Onager to take those shots, step on the gas, and preserve its points. It wants the Quasar to never, ever, ever even approach weapons range of the enemy fleet and push silently from the back to ensure squadron dominance. So you know the Quasar is going to run. You know it's going to be far in the back, hard to get to. And then the Raider, it's a lifeboat. It's not a fighting ship. It's probably the most combat it's going to see is in support of the squadrons, because when you break it right down to it, this is basically a fleet that leans 100% on Imperial squadron dominance. And you're going to see that in Louis' fleet as well. Um, Imperial squads are just the best squads. The next fleet we'll discuss is Louis Andre's fleet, which is kind of the same thing. It's a big, fast-moving target ship that's going to do some damage and an escape, comboed with a raider to get you a third activation, and a flotilla in this case, and a dominant Imperial squadron wing. So Louis got an IST-2, which is a classic ship, Moff Jerjerrod here, which gives him a lot of maneuverability, and it takes pressure off of his style stack, so he doesn't have to key up maneuvers a lot. He's going to push squadrons with this thing, so it's pretty much exclusively going to dial in squads and rely on Moff Jerjerrod to allow it to do the maneuvering that it needs to. He can get a token from the Comsnet flotilla that we'll talk about later in the list, and that's pretty much all Louis is going to do in terms of navigating. So you got Nita, which gives an evade in place of the crit contain, which is very powerful. He's got flight controllers, which again, you know, this is a carrier. We're going to push flight controllers here. Boosted comms, and then we have early warning and point defense and LTTs. LTTs is pretty much just a standard catch-all upgrade that helps with squads, helps against ships, and then you've got early warning and point defense, and to me, that screams I'm going to come in slowly until I can pounce, hit, and fly through. Because early warning is not good in, you know, when ships are surrounding you. It's only good in the front or the back, when you're closing or when you're leaving. It's also particularly good against squadrons, especially if you can tie things down and keep them from attacking you from different angles. That and point defense make this a very difficult ship to bomb down, and a very good ship at coming in fast, hitting, and leaving. And I think that's the takeaway from both Louis and Broba's fleet, is that an Imperial strong archetype is, and has always been, a Star Destroyer screaming in, hitting something and flying away, or an Onager in this case, or in the case of Broba. But the idea being, my big ship is going to damage but not commit far enough into the fight that it's in danger, and then escape preserving its points and let the fact that my squadrons are just flat out unarguably better than yours, and I'm going to show you that, and roll through your squadrons. That's typically been the Imperial formula, and that's what these two fleets kind of do. The difference in Louis' fleet is that the Iden Versio Raider with Instigator is a lot more geared to fight. It's got Iden Versio, so it can stick its nose into a squad ball. It's got Impetuous, so it can get a second flak shot. It's got an Ordnance Expert. It's the Black Dice Raider. It's very, very damaging as a flak boat, and I think that it is mostly there to help his squads quickly and decisively win an air war to free up his air wing, as you'll see. We have a flotilla, we have Darth Vader, we have Comsnet, we have reserve hangar decks. Reserve hangar decks is kind of like paying 3 points to get another TIE Interceptor back, which is one of the he takes one to basically come back with that. So he's got like a 14 point, 5 health, 2 life TIE Interceptor. And then we've got Vader, because for some inexplicable reason you can airlock Nita, retain his evade, and get a shot. So you'll see that, and that's something that you need to pick up on. Is like every single Imperial fleet in the top 4 and pretty much in the top 10 has Vader in it, except for Broba's fleet, and that's only because Broba didn't have the officer slot available to take him. So if you're playing Imperials, you need to very seriously consider taking Vader, you know, and taking at least token like one point officers in all your ships, because of how powerful that is. And then we'll go to the Ace package. This is a little more conventional, but he's got the same 4 basically. He's got Steel, Jindin, Mauler, Tell, Saber. So those 5 are pretty much unchanged. The only difference between Broba's and Broba's first 5 and Louis' first 5 is that Saber or Mauler got flopped, both of whom are sources of direct, unblockable damage that don't have anything to do with defensive tokens, which I think is a key tool to have to kill other aces. Then he's got a TIE Interceptor, which is there to basically use the reserve hangar decks and be really good value for what you're paying. And then he's got 2 fire sprays, where Broba had 2 defenders. He's got 2 fire sprays here. They are considerably slower and harder to deliver, but considerably more damaging. There's no bomber command center here, but they do have a pretty good likelihood. I feel like it's like 65% likelihood of producing 2 damage every time they pull the trigger. So Louis can very consistently do 2 damage with steel, 2 damage with Jindon, 2 damage, and 1 to 2 damage with these 2 fire sprays. So he can burst out and put out, 8 blue dice with bomber off of that Star Destroyer's activation, followed by its guns, and that is the threat that this thing presents. And that's how you lose to this thing. If I'm looking at this fleet thinking, how does it function, how does it fight, Star Destroyer tries to knife in, tries to hurt something, and it wants to set up a scenario where it can get a hold to the biggest, toughest thing in your fleet, hit you with steel twice, hit you with fire sprays if they're in range twice, probably send Mauler to tie some things up, or Tail to prevent a retaliatory strike against steel, and then it's going to step on the gas and leave at a good angle with Durgerod. The Raider's not really going to stick its nose into a fight it can't win. It's probably going to be fast and try to support the squadrons, but from an angle that it can escape. The flotilla obviously is not going to be super aggressive. It's probably going to tail the Star Destroyer and then peel away if it can, but it's a sacrificial unit if you have to. It also can provide flak. So that's my assessment of Louis' fleet and how it functions. I fought Louis a good bit. He's one of my people that I train with regularly. I've seen this played. That's the formula of these 2 types of fleets. The Imperial Air Wing and one big large. I don't know if there's a catchphrase for it, but it's basically big scary ship and these 5 aces and whatever else. Then we'll come to Paul, the fleet that I was probably most rooting for in this finals, in the top 4. Paul, I've played him in person several times. I've played this particular fleet in person at LVO, and it's a very good fleet, very tough fleet. It hits hard from long range, as you'll see. He's got an ISD-2, a VIC-2, 2 flotillas, and a Raider. And the big crux of the fleet is the 2 big Star Destroyers. You've got Spinal Armament, Gunnery Team, Krennic, ISD-2. That's going to hit you with 5, and then Confired, make it 6 dice with a mass reroll from Krennic with gunnery teams. It has reinforced blast doors, point defense ion cannons. He has Harrow, which has disposable capacitors, which can also hit you for at least 6 at long range with gunnery teams. And then he's got point defense ion cannons on it too. So you're seeing the trend here. Point defense ion cannons is on everything that can take it. And I think that's something, a good takeaway that we can take from this Final Four, or just the field in general, is that if you have an ion cannon slot, you take point defense ion cannons unless you have a very good reason not to. And almost every single ship that could take point defense took it in the top 4. That holds true in the top 10 as well, with the exception, I think, of Erasius, who took heavy ion emplacements on his MC-80 Star Cruiser, because he's looking to come in dagger, do a massive amount of damage, and keep flying. But a takeaway to this is point defense ion cannons, really, really good, taken almost ubiquitously. If you're running a fleet and you're trying to be tanky, this is the play. This is the way. And then we have Commander Beck on Harrow, which is interesting. A lot of people are like, what the heck does he even do? What Commander Beck does, especially on Harrow, is Harrow wants to, number 1, be using a navigate command so that it can fuel engine techs. Number 2, it wants to be able to fuel gunnery teams. So every turn, Paul wants to be able to do both those things, and so Commander Beck is the answer here, because what will happen is Commander Beck will give him that navigate token and that concentrate fire token that he needs to do his 2 effects. Downside is you take raid tokens, but you can discard an entire dial to cancel all raid tokens. So that's what he'll do every single turn. It's like he'll reveal a dial. It almost doesn't matter what he reveals. He will get a dial. He'll get 2 tokens of his choosing at the expense of a dial. And so that allows Harrow to fuel engine techs every turn and fuel gunnery teams every turn. I think it's a nifty little build, something you see a lot on Harrow when you do see it taken. We have a Raider. with Titus and X-Rax. Titus is probably just to screw with people, and then X-Rax, obviously, for the points, it's a really good buy. You have Vader, munitions resupply. So again, handing out those rerolls, because the theme in every single list I've ever seen Paul write, and he does very well with all of his lists, is mass rerolls and ability to make sure that when he pulls the trigger, he does a lot of damage. And that's a big part of being able to win by crushing people at long range. That's what he's trying to do here. He's trying to engage with us with ISD2 and a VIC2 and do so much damage at long range that he'll grind you down inside. Even if you fly past his arcs, he'll grind you down with his side arcs and beat you up. And so that's the thing here. Dice fixing is king, especially in a squadless fleet, because you're only going to get one pass at this. And so Paul is, I think, the king of layering in these rerolls, and he's obviously going to take Vader because Vader synergizes with that. In fact, I bet Titus is mostly there to mass reroll on the Vader, not even so much to screw with people at their speed on their speed chart. So that's what Paul's list is about. And when you approach this fleet, you think, all right, well, how does it win? What kind of things does it do? It's very tough. You have functionally a 17-hull Star Destroyer. He's going to lead with that. He's going to definitely, make you come through that to get to the rest of his fleet. He's got 5 activations, but only 5 deployments, so he's not going to be real sneaky at deployment. But he wants to create a situation where there's a long-range shootout that he can do a decent to above average amount of damage twice to 2 targets on the way in to set himself up for a really good second round of engagement where he hopefully kills through and continues to fly. And he's banking on his durability being enough to allow him to weather whatever storm comes his way until he can deliver that second gunnery team, a set of gunnery teams, and clear out most things. So that's pretty much all there is to be said for it. So the takeaway from this is, if you're going to have ships, if your damage is going to come from ships, you need to be reliable in your ability to apply damage. So you're going to have lots of rerolls inbuilt. If you're playing Imperials, Vader is uniformly taken for that purpose. And point defense ion cannons comboed with reserve hangar decks and a lot of hull seems to have been enough to land him in the top 4. So it can be done. So the last fleet we'll discuss is Sam S's fleet. He's got an Onager fleet with 2 interdictors and a flotilla and no squads. So this is a very different, odd fleet because it doesn't have a lot of what you normally expect to see. But it's got Admiral Ramadi as its admiral to try to help the Onager. It's got Ozzel and the same veteran gunners and ordnance experts kind of deal that Brobafett had. The long-range ignition and cataclysm. So it's pretty much the same shell with the addition of Admiral Ozzel and a medical team instead of the engine techs. Then he's got 2 interdictors that got some various different upgrades, but the big things is he's got targeting scramblers, he's got projection experts, point defense ion cannons on each, and proximity mines. So the idea here is that they're able to use their 5 engineering to make a lot of shields, to send a lot of shields to whatever is being targeted. Targeting scramblers also, negates a lot of damage. Point defense ion cannons negates a lot of damage, and he's got 2 of these. Not a lot of offensive upgrades really. These guys are meant to basically endure. And he's got no squadrons. And I think the reasoning for that is he doesn't want to give anybody something that they can cheaply pick off and get points here. And so basically, the thing you got to recognize about this fleet is he's got 3 different ships with proximity mines on it, and there's a reason for that. And the reason for that is he's got the grav shift that lets you move obstacles. And for some inexplicable reason, you can put a proximity mine on an obstacle and then move it towards people, which is exactly what he's planning on doing. Seems like to me, if you were the game designer and you put a reason in there for it not to be able to be placed within distance 1 to 5 of an enemy ship, you shouldn't completely just negate that whole thing by allowing it to be moved by an obstacle. Because basically what's being done here is the obstacles are being placed, the prox mines are going on top of the obstacles and they're being moved towards the enemy to create a super high concentration of proximity mines. And that's usually not a problem because the proximity mines are pretty, even here, I think he's got 6 mines, 5 to 6 mines, I believe, if I'm doing my math correctly. Even with that, you would be hard pressed to really get a lot of damage on that. But he's also got 2 copies of the grav wells that create auras in which, if you deploy your ship, it is deployed at speed 0. So that is a problem because you stand a good chance of getting hit by an onager on turn 1 because it's got the Ozel movement that it gets to do before the turn, and then it's going to fire with Cataclysm and hit you with no defensive tokens. It may not crush you, but it will hurt you. Depending on what it shoots at, it might kill it. So basically this is an ultimate tank list, and it's really enabled by point defense ion cannons, but the expert shield techs makes it super hard to kill as well. You got your flotilla that fuels Cataclysm mostly and slings a token. I'm sure that is there to sling tokens to whichever interdictor or onager is taking the most fire to repair or get it to navigate to escape if it needs to. It's just kind of a catch-all. And then obviously you're going to have Vader because we discussed earlier how ubiquitously good he is, and he's got the interdictor title on one of the interdictors so that you can get basically a refresh on scramblers, so you can scramble 2 different things. The concept of the list is again to give up absolutely no points and to kill whatever it can, and it's successful. He ended up winning the whole thing with this. To my knowledge, he's won every tournament that he's played in with this. He won the Assault on Endor with this. He won LVO with this. He won Vassel World Cup with this. And it's an interesting take. It's a very good list. And congrats to him for mastering it. Paul almost was able to kind of turn the corner with his Vic, as you might have seen on the Discord, and kind of get into it and hurt it. But the only person that I've even heard of beating it is actually Chivalry, who was able to basically use rogues to not come anywhere near it and bomb I think the onager down. So let's wrap this up. Some takeaways that we can come up with from this is, number 1, all of the Imperial fleets, with the exception of Paul's fleet, are basically built around a single ship doing most of the damage. You look at the onager in Brobafett's fleet, you look at the onager in Sam's fleet, and you look at the Star Destroyer in Louis' fleet, and all 3 of them are meant to do damage with reliable shots because they've got LTTs on the Star Destroyer, they've got veteran gunners and OEs on the onagers, and they have most of them have Vader to reliably deliver good shots. So when you get a shot, you take it and you do a lot of damage with it. And then they're also at least speed 3 and either have some maneuverability tech or have hopefully interdictor screening them, but the intent is to hit and escape and preserve those points. I think the onager in particular suits this well because it can start taking those shots basically a turn earlier than anybody else can. Because of its extended range, assuming you can keep it on target. I think that's why the onager is so popular in that regard. And Paul's fleet, in contrast, still has lots of dice fixing, still has a Star Destroyer, but he also has a Vic, and what he's trying to do is he's trying to set up an engagement where he has both of his big ships engaging at the same time, and gunnery teaming, hitting 2 different targets and grinding them down, and he's going to try to overwhelm and then set up a situation where the second to the third turn of engagement, he's probably going to go his first activation with one of those ships is going to kill 2 things. Paul is much more of a, we're going to stand here, we're going to have a fight. But he still, again, leans heavily on that dice fixing from Krennic because he needs reliability. When you pull the trigger in Armada and there's a time clock, you don't get a lot of shots. When you pull the trigger, you got to mean it. You got to hurt somebody when you hit them, and you can see that in all of these fleets. Also, you'll see So we got the defensive tech. We talked about the long range shots with a ship that's intent is to hit and get away and preserve its points. And we also have to talk about the squadrons. Squadrons, the two fleets that use squadrons, they use pretty much the same concept. The fillers that were added on to the core 5 were different, but you have the core 5 of Jindon, Steel, Tell, some floater, Ace, usually some TIE fighter, interceptor, or maybe I've seen Whisper in that slot. I've seen Mauler in that slot most of the time. We saw Suntir in that slot from Broba, and you see Saber. Those 5 are pretty much, in my opinion, the best package of aces in the game. You back that up with, a flight controller's push, and it's very, very difficult for anybody to really stand in front of that. And then you kind of fill in the rest. It's really strong. I personally have been very frustrated by it, just because my assertion is that Squall is easily the strongest carrier in the game and has the longest striking distance of any squads in the game once you factor in Squall. And to give that tool to the same faction that also has the Onager, that also has the TIE Defender, that also has Merrick, Steel, and Jindon, seems like a really bad game design choice. I don't understand how. I would love to have a game designer sit in front of me, look me in the eyes, and explain to me how he thinks that is on an even playing field with everybody else. Because if you're gonna, but you're gonna see this. You saw this last year. You saw this year. You're gonna see Imperial squads that can almost single-handedly win games by themselves without the support of their fleet. And that was, I was hoping that would go away with point defense ion cannons, and it did somewhat. Sam ended up winning it, and Paul made it all the way to the final, so maybe that's the light at the end of the tunnel. But at the end of the day, if you're preparing for a tournament, you got to prepare for Onagers, you got to prepare for Imperial squadrons, because they are the best. And they have the best tools, and they also have the longest range guns, which is why I think you see the top 4 is the way it is. We just got the results in from Adepticon. There were no Imperials in the top 5, I think, which is very surprising to me. I don't know if this is I can't really explain that. So this is very interesting to me. Maybe we're in a very interesting time in Armada, or maybe people are like, okay, we've seen Imperial Aces dominance for 3 years now. It's obviously the best. We're gonna move on. I'm hoping that that's the case, that people are choosing to go to something different that's a little more balanced. But I think the Rebel answer here, at least if you look at Adepticon, is Rogues. I think you'll see the more successful Rebels that are playing into this are those that have Rogues and either something tanky or a bunch of MSU ships that are hard to bring down. That's why I think you'll see Kraken and number 6 and number 7 in Vassel World Cup. That's why you see, you have Raz Proteus, who did very well at Adepticon with a similar list. He did very well at LVO with a list that was built on a lot of smalls that can close quickly, because, if you give them one big target, Imperials are very good at killing it. So I think that might be the way forward for Rebels, with rogue balls and things that can basically threaten outside of that activation, because Rebels don't really have a good carrier push. I don't have a good answer for you from Clones and Separatists. I think Separatists basically are in a better spot than Clones, but if you're playing Separatists, I think you need to be looking at those reserve hangar decks. You need to be trying to come up with ways to help your squadrons with flak, and I think you need to be looking at ways to try to use Patriot's Fist to bring down the Quasar. I don't like advocating the use of Patriot's Fist, because I think it's also way overtuned, and I have never fielded it, will never field it. But I think it's very good, and if you're playing into that, I think maybe you play Patriot's Fist, because it does have the capability to smoke a Quasar at long range with a single pull of the trigger, and that's kind of what it takes to take the fight out of these Imperial squads. That's something worth note, is these are not rogues. If you can either run the Quasar away from them to where the Quasar has to leave and can't support them with a squad push, or if you can kill the Quasar these big Imperial wings do fall apart. The only problem with that is the people that are good with it, they don't usually lose their quasar very easily. Or if they do, they make you do such reckless things on the way in that they're going to make you pay in kind to get to their quasar. So just think about that. That's my opinion. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. And see you next time.